With the arrival of the Internet of Things, the border between cyberspace and the kinetic world has now been formally erased. Cybersecurity now is crucial not only to your ability to connect, collaborate, transfer funds, call, Uber, book a date, but also to your physical safety while you're flying, cooking, and even consuming personalized medicine. We have a very distinguished panel together with us here today to speak about cyber threats and opportunities. And it's my pleasure now to welcome the moderator of this Stalwarts Roundtable session, the Director and Head of ICT Government Community for the World Economic Forum, Danil Kerimi, to introduce the session and his panel.
I was asked very briefly to speak what the World Economic Forum does in this space, but again, I will be as brief as possible because I think I am fascinated to hear what they have to say. The World Economic Forum has been active on the cybersecurity issues and the broader tech policy for the past 5 years because we always try to follow what's important for the world economy. And obviously, there is nothing, in my personal view, there is nothing more important for the world's economy as clearly defined technology policy of today. Cyber is, of course, one aspect of it. Future of the internet governance is another thing. And with the arrival of Internet of Things, it's as David just said, it's not only about the way we share information, but also really about our physical well-being these days. If you talk to the people in the Valley, you always use this allegory of Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever that is. I don't know whether these comparisons will work here, but literally, with the arrival of the Internet of Things, we opened the domain between the two worlds. It's no longer two separate worlds. We're no longer living our Amish life in the physical world and the digital life inside of the computers. But it's really it's day to day, and it will grow closer together. So, having said that, I would like to introduce a good friend, Carlos. And by the way, on this panel, we'll have a perspective from technology companies, from financial services, from the government, so depth of expertise. And I will ask Carlos to introduce a little bit himself, his company, and speak about the issues.
Thank you very much, Danil. It's a pleasure to be again this year with you here in New York for the M&A Advisory Summit. As we have been discussing in Davos, I remember Davos 2011 selected cybersecurity as one of the 4 global risks, and that was anticipating what is actually happening. The cybersecurity is already costing the industry $3 trillion and growing, and we are not yet talking about IoT. The reasons are very simple. I mean, the web, the World Wide Web, which is on the top of the internet, was designed by physicians in the CERN in Geneva, actually, in Switzerland, where my company is based, without any thinking or objective to one day conduct the transactions that we are currently conducting on the internet. The internet was actually a way to just interconnect sites, and the World Wide Web brought the hyperlink environment, which made those connections even easier and more faster. But now the internet is actually becoming a utility. It's not anymore a network. It's not anymore a connection. It's actually something which has become disruptive. The internet has implications from health, education, government, finance. Everything is on the net now. To the point that we are even adding now another dimension of the complexity, which is the objects, the IoT. 50 billion devices are going to be connected by the year 2020, which is in a few years. We have already 6 billion devices connected, and this is not only your mobile phones, this is also now your alarm systems, this is your watches, this is all the elements that you use to collect your health and send that information, like Jawbone, like Fitbits. So the Internet of Things is coming. General Electric just announced the industrial internet, which is all General Electric products are going to be connected to the internet. But again, we are connecting to an unsecure facility. So we are in a situation like, I don't know, many of you have been traveling in developing countries where the roads are very bad, and therefore you need to buy a very sophisticated 4x4 car just to offset the deficiencies of the road. So we are putting a lot of money on the institutions. We are helping banks to get secure. We are helping governments to get secure, but the underlying infrastructure is not secure. So obviously the problem is huge, and it's a massive endeavor that nobody can solve, because the internet has another dimension which makes the complexity, is that it's geopolitical. So every country has a say on the internet. It's not something that you can regulate from one country. It's not something that you can impose from one country. You will have to go country by country and get in there to adopt whatever international standardization you're going to be based on the internet. Another threat we are looking on the internet is what we call the hackers. Everybody talks about hacker. This organization has been hacked. JP Morgan has been hacked. Target has been hacked. But who are the hackers? Do we ever met a hacker? I mean, hackers is kind of an abstract. Some people have done it, obviously, but hacker is an abstract notion. But behind the hackers, you have a very well-organized industry now. The hackers wants money. It's a business incentive to be a hacker. Now you have a situation where you have some countries that they are developing hacking code, which is only, these people are not hacking yet, just developing the code. And then you have a hacker that will buy that code in order to hack somebody and make money on it. So it's a distribution of responsibility. Nobody hacks from A to Z. It's a totally distributed industry. By the way, you get paid later with Bitcoins, so you don't even get paid with MasterCard or anything that you will leave a trace. You will get with Bitcoins, and you get your credit inside the deep web, where all those bad things happen. So the complexity is there, the solutions are there as well, and this is good news. Companies like Wisekey and many other companies are very, very proactive to bring in solutions. MasterCard is doing an amazing job as well. And I think this is the main point now, that there's a big problem, but it's also a big solution, which, if well implemented, could become an infrastructure for development of many new services.
Thank you. Well, MasterCard was mentioned, so Hany, what do you have to add?
So I want to build on what Carlos has said in a couple of really important points, and I want to pick up some of the topics from the previous panel as well and kind of connect these things. The business of standards is an area we don't speak enough about. When you consider the percentage of the world that neither has access to financial services, or even, let's be simple about it, a bank account, 2 billion people. That's 2 billion consumers, potential consumers, in some of the markets we've been talking about, have no access to actually pay for stuff. That means that any company purporting or aspiring to do business in those geographies, you've got to subtract that today from their potential target market, and you don't hear that very often. The second thing is around security and around standards for security. The critical nature of public-private cooperation and standard setting around security is an area that's not talked about enough. This topic around cybersecurity, if you're not paying attention to this or you're not thinking about this, your head's not in the right place, and you're here today. This is an absolutely critical topic that's not to be avoided. And at the same time, the returns on investments in cybersecurity are today really difficult to measure. But it's an absolutely necessary thing that needs to happen. From our perspective, we're one of probably 2 standards-setting organizations in the world that are able to enact and effect global standards. We've done it in the past for financial services, but we're also able to do it, and we are increasingly doing it for lots of other things, including security. So Apple Pay uses our digital enablement services for the Apple Pay product, as will Samsung and others. This is very core for us, consistent standards, but it also requires an active and heavy-handed dialogue between policymakers, regulators, and private corporations like ourselves. If we're able to achieve that, and then you feather in smart companies like Carlos's companies and enlightened governments like what we've started to see from the US government and others as well around standards for cybersecurity, then we really can start talking about opening up markets in a very meaningful way and opening up capacity in markets. And that really achieves 2 things. First of all, it brings about an efficiency ratio that today is just assumed as a norm. And I will tell you that in most industries, that efficiency ratio, there's the opportunity for at least a 50% improvement in the efficiency ratio. If you think about urban transit, you might think dull, boring, what the hell? It's a very big, very, very big industry. If you think about maritime shipping, if you think about the airline sector, I don't know how many people know, but airlines lose about 10% of the face value of tickets by the time they get paid, and the time value of money, or the time it takes for an airline to get paid, is between 18 and 35 days. That's a function of poor standards and a lack of innovation in those sectors. So, and I could go on and on and on about music, about media, about retailing, many, many things. The second thing is, the second dimension to this is this notion of authentication versus identification. And I'm sure you're going to say more about this in a second, as will you, Jeffrey. But these are topics that are kind of beyond the debate phase globally. The need to authenticate increasingly is becoming an exercise in the need to authenticate, i.e. to verify that I am who I say I am, particularly in a digital world, in real time, in a constant fashion. It's no longer okay, and research plays this out, it's no longer okay for us to have a collection of passwords that none of us can remember and we write down on pieces of paper or put in our phones or whatever to do stuff, and the exercise of authenticating yourself taking even minutes at its best. That's no longer okay. And much of the industries that are going to thrive and emerge out of this Internet of Things conversation rely on and are depending on the notion of persistent authentication. And that takes us into a realm that I know is going to make some people quite uncomfortable, but it takes us into a realm where we have to start thinking, and we're doing research and experimenting and running trials with human biometrics, heart rate signatures, things like that. They're in society today, they're being used with the control of the consumer. We're going there as a society. That doesn't mean that there's a big brother entity that's recording your heart rate signature. That's it. The importance of this is that has to be in your control. Those personally identifiable elements have to be in your control. The second part of the story is, in the segment, is identification. This is where it gets interesting, where the idea of who you are and the need to protect that from hackers and from identity theft and so forth has really stepped up a notch. So authentication linked to identification that anonymizes you is really important, i.e. we now have the technology and the ability to basically create a token in movie speak, this is a silly word, but in movie speak, an avatar for who you are, so that your identity is not breached and your identity is not stolen, where those tokens can be verified across a common standard worldwide. So I think those things, if we address those, there are very significant markets that get opened up in a very, very meaningful way. And there are very significant levels of efficiency in industries that today maybe you're not thinking about. And there's an empowerment and enablement of consumers in a really profound way. And we'll talk about some more examples of that in a minute.
Thank you, Hany. And by the way, thank you very much for bringing Avatar up. At least if there's one thing the audience will take out is our movie preferences. Jeffrey, you represent one of the most innovative parts of the government of this country and the world. What is your perspective on some of these issues?
Well, is anybody confused yet? Cyber is everything at the moment. I mean, it really is. Anything that, as long as there's electricity, it's going to be a problem, and it continues to grow and grow and grow every second as companies are continuing to add these Internet of Things, these devices, without any consideration for security. It continues to be a problem, and this is growing faster than anybody is actually measuring. But it is a business, and there's a lot of business opportunities in here, and especially even on the hacker side, there is customer service centers. So if you buy code to hack and it doesn't work, you can actually call somebody. And it's actually better than calling some real companies because they're very nice and they'll actually refund you or they'll work through the problem, which is quite crazy. But it is a big business, and to kind of make it a little bit relevant to what's happening in Baltimore right now. We have a company called me yesterday that they monitor social media. They monitor your avatars, your identity, out in social media, but the amount of activity they were able to see, they were able to identify that things were going to happen. And so we were able to mobilize the services based on what this commercial company was just seeing happening out in cyberspace to begin to get police and other activities in place. But the challenge that we ran into, I ran into, is this standards. we're working on standards every day, but there is no standards body at the moment to allow this integration. So it took personal relationships in order to make this data relevant, this intelligence relevant, to get people in the right places. Now this company, ZeroFox, which is doing it, may be a good target for acquisition soon. But the other piece, having come back from RSA last week, talking on the West Coast with cybersecurity companies, and as it sort of relates to this original question, are you confused? Everyone is confused, unless you're in the business like Carl is. But there isn't such thing as a broad expert. You're just really a specialist in certain areas. And so this is a ripe time. What we're starting to see, especially with startups, is that they're not getting money from VCs because the VCs just don't have the expertise to identify what's happening or what's of value. So what we're starting to see is really mini acquisitions. I have one company that acquired 6 companies in the last 8 weeks, and that's where they're finding their innovation. And that's where growth is starting to happen. So I think to make it relevant for this crowd, really these mini acquisitions, 50 million and under, are starting to really heat up because that's the opportunity for innovation. But I think, I'm going to touch on standards real quick because we only have 20 minutes to talk about everything in cyber, which is never works. But the standards piece, there's a lot of argument that says, hey, if we have standards, that makes it really easy for the bad guys. But I say no, because it allows for governments to begin to think about what is identity. Let's create a standard for identity, and then let's create a standard for authentication. And as you discussed, there are 2 different things. And government certainly, at least Western governments, are very interested in maintaining this idea of privacy, but the authentication piece is essential in order for transactions to take place. And for some of us, we have many identities, but we want to be authenticated. And I think it's even, we were talking the other day, is this idea of authenticating diamonds. Not saying that they're real diamonds, but that they are the diamonds that everyone says they are, which is interesting. There's also authenticating medication, to saying that medication really is the medication that it says it is, not that it's a copy, or not that it's a fake, but that really is that chain of custody exists. And I think it's the same thing with virtual currencies that are coming too, and other ways of paying. It's essential to know how we are able to authenticate but maintain anonymity and privacy. And contrary to what many may think in the press, that is a big interest for governments, is maintaining that privacy, especially in the EU. But here in the United States, that really is essential in Congress, as well as in our state we have NSA and NIST, which is developing standards for financial services, for healthcare, and for many other industries. And I guess that's one of my jobs as well, is helping maintain those programs. But I think trying to tie this up, there is a lot of opportunity if you're a bad guy or gal, especially a bad gal. There's a lot of opportunity for business on all sides. And I think it's important, though, to understand that the entire economy in the world rests in cyberspace. And that is one of the biggest threats that we face at the moment, is that we probably will lose control of the internet in the next 5 years or so. And if we don't get this figured out, which is essential for business to do, and I think especially relevant for this group in an M&A perspective, we need sort of growth for some of these new companies that are solving this problem, then the game is over. And I'm not trying to scare everyone, but we've really got to start paying attention. Cyber is hard, but it is incredibly important. And it's not just about the internet. It's not just about computers. It's about data. It's the data of things.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think in all of these discussions, particularly in media, there is a lot of confusion between availability of data, between integrity of data, authentication, privacy. The fact that the post office knows where to deliver your letter does not mean that they necessarily will read it. So there is a lot of complexity that still needs to kind of be talked about so that the people understand. But I thank you for what I've heard from the panel, every problem is a business opportunity, and I like that very much, because the US government is now openly saying that for the past 20 years, cyberspace has been a great strategic asset, and it may become a great strategic liability if we don't deal with it, with the issues that are in front of us not right now. But I want to come back to something that Hany has been saying. So 2 billion is still unbanked in the world. 2/3 of the population is not, of the world's population is not on the internet. How do we make sure that we do want them banked, we do want them online, but how do we make sure that with each connected node, the complexity actually works in forward to security rather than insecurity? Any thoughts?
There's a couple of things. In everything we do, we are moving on standards basis, and we are converging. We now no longer differentiate between physical world security and standards and digital. That's really important. There are pieces that we have to rely on third parties. It's not all within our control. So the actual technology to authenticate things and people, we've got to rely on standards, and we've got to rely on companies to do that. But for our part, we are working towards globally consistent standards. Let me bring it to life a little bit. So the South African government's benefits agency, SASSA, worked with us a couple of years ago to completely take cash out of their benefit payments to people in South Africa and provided them with, back then we weren't using phones, we were using cards, but with biometric data in the card because of literacy and a whole bunch of other things, but also more importantly because of security, and in one foul swoop banked the entire population of people receiving welfare payments. The government of Nigeria has announced the same thing, and they're taking it one further where they're actually thinking quite actively about digital and physical, domestic and cross-border activity for its population. And so, you know, these are laudable things that are going on in the world that are really important. The Chinese government's announcements last week about opening up competition in China for financial services and payments and so forth, really critical. China's been on a standards path for a while, but it's now merging and converging with the rest of the world. That's really critical in terms of opening up access to the Chinese market. So those things are really practical examples of how to get people banked, how to get them digitally and physically converged. I will tell you that in many of these markets, the thing that has to be evaluated, particularly if you're in the space of thinking about buying companies that are operating in these worlds, you've got to be looking at, is there a leapfrog, which is what these countries want to do in terms of standards. They're not going to walk in the footsteps of the Western world in terms of how we develop. They're going to jump an entire generation of issues and mistakes and development that we've had. And so as you're thinking about that, you have to be very clear about that with the companies you're looking at. Are they on that trajectory? Are they ready for that leapfrog effect, or are they following in conventional steps that we've seen in the Western world and simply taking it to emerging markets?
Yes, I just want to follow on two things that Hany just said before, which I think are essential, and also Jeffrey's prediction that the internet will be in trouble in a few years if we don't take action. Again, if we go back again, 25 years ago when the World Wide Web was created, identity was not a concern. Not only the infrastructure was not secure, but the web did not have an identity. Actually, that's one of the major problems we are facing here. Then the web is a horizontal structure where the identities are vertical structure. So when I created Wisekey, when I was before in the United Nations for 15 years looking into this subject, and when we launched Wisekey in Switzerland, the first target we got was to do the e-voting project for the Swiss population. Our company is helping the Swiss government to let the people, Swiss people, to vote. And as you know, Switzerland is a direct democracy country. We have something like 20 referendums per year, so there's a lot of e-voting that we have done in the last years. And we've never been hacked. I mean, this is the most, for a hacker kind of prestige will be amazing if he will bring down an e-voting project on a country. So why we succeeded using the internet, because that uses the internet, uses now mobile, but when we started using the internet, is because we added a very strong authentication process. Authentication is something which is solving the problems on the internet. Actually, in the United States, you have the National Strategy for Trusted Identity on Cyberspace, which is a US government initiative, which will bring a strong authentication into the US consumer. Last year, 25 million Americans lost their identity. Identity theft is a huge, huge problem here in the United States. And it costs a lot of money to recover back your identity. It will cost you something like $50,000 to $100,000 in legal fees just to get it back. So the good news, if you apply identity, last week or 2 weeks ago in Switzerland, Wisekey launched the first ever intelligent watch with Bulgari. I mean, this is a very new thing. This is now the Apple Watch. This is actually a mechanical watch that we managed to put an identity without any electricity needs that lets the watch to open your car, open your house, make a payment, so you can basically pay with your watch using a mechanical watch. So the technology is there, but what this needs, I think what we need to do is there are many good practices around the world. Estonia is another country with amazing performance on the use of a secure internet. Estonians are doing something like 90% of government transactions already electronically, from e-voting, from paying their taxes, and so on. So there's very good practices around the world, and if you combine together into a mass market deployment, and that's why we need bigger cybersecurity companies. Cybersecurity companies are not yet big enough to be able to reach out in a global basis. We have good cybersecurity companies in Spain, in France, in England, in Germany, all of them working in an island of trust. They don't interoperate between themselves. So it's a huge opportunity for M&A specialists to really consolidate the market. I mean, you need to have a very big cybersecurity company then that can bring those best practices around the world and industrializes them at the global scale. The companies on cybersecurity that we have now listed, without mentioning names, but you know them, they are all-star cybersecurity company. They still have this vision of the fortress approach, which is everybody inside the fortress, the castle, is safe, the bad people are outside. But actually, the threats that now are inside. JP Morgan was hacked from inside, and everybody gets hacked from inside. The big situation now is that everybody's being hacked. The world is divided by two types of companies, the one that they know that they have been hacked, and the others that don't know yet that they're being hacked, but everybody has been hacked. So we need to bring a global solution for what is going to be a very global problem.
Even the White House was hacked yesterday. I think exactly, and I think the approach to emerging markets. I'd say it's interesting. I worked on a project in Afghanistan, and I would say they have the most advanced payment system at the moment for their people, and they pay everyone electronically, which actually reduces fraud, and also reduces some ripoff. But I think we look at this the bottom of the pyramid, as my friend C.K. Prahal called it, is that the barriers to entry in those markets are incredibly low. So if you're looking at companies that are working in places where governments have yet to catch up and establish standard requirements or even policy, is that they're taking off. So in Africa, we're seeing incredible use of payment systems, electronic currencies, and in other ways, and adoption of security. And the interesting thing in the United States, we're slow to adopt security because we're worried about the rules. In other places, they don't care about the rules. And so when you think about from a business perspective, that's the places that I look. Is Africa. I'm looking in Asia because that's where stuff is happening, and the markets are opening up in incredible ways. But we don't have, as Carlos said, many large players. We have a lot of regional players, even in the United States. Because this is nascent, we're still yet to figure out what cybersecurity is. It redefines itself every day from a technological perspective. I'm going to say the simple definition is it's a people problem, and we need technology to solve it. But it's a people problem. A lot of opportunity.
Thanks so much. I personally might be a minority here. I'm really excited about this conversation, but I'm about to be tackled because our time is up. So why don't we take 30 seconds, starting with Carlos going that way, to finalize and perhaps leave audience with one final thought, and then I'll wrap it up.
So just to what I just said before, just to add the consumer aspect of it. I mean, cybersecurity is not only a corporate issue, it's a consumer issue. We have been very successful in solving very big epidemics, virus. We can do the same thing electronically, provided that we increase our personal approach to cybersecurity. I mean, it's like, as some people say, cybersecurity is like a basic hygiene. It's like washing your teeth every morning. You need to apply those practices. Secure your email, install SSL in your website, and very basic things that will reduce 99% of your problems on cybersecurity, just to put the perspective of the consumer.
From my perspective, we buy a lot of companies, and every other day you see that we've bought stuff. We're building muscle in our business. But one of the things that on the enterprise side of our business, which most of you don't know that much about, but what we're doing there is we're bringing together companies big and small and creating new ventures and new alliances and new entities where companies in a multilateral environment where we're bringing together how should I call it, unlikely bedfellows, co-opetition, and creating new equity. And the secret sauce that we're using is that we're unlocking spare capacity in those companies to actually work together rather than asking them to make significant investments.
So too many things, but as I look at behind us, so M&A. Look at companies that are either doing authentication and identity, look at critical infrastructure, and look at payments. That's where a lot of activity is going to happen in the next few years. An incredible amount of value is going to be created there. Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you that are more scared and confused than when you came in this morning, I would like to just close this panel with a very short story. In late 1860s, I believe, Harrods department store in London was the first one in Europe, perhaps in the world, that introduced escalators in their department store. And people were so scared about taking self-moving stairs that they had to introduce 2 employees on the top of the stairs that would pass on a sniffing salt to the ladies and sherry to the gentlemen as they arrived to the next floor. Now, as much as some of you might wish to have a sherry every time you take an escalator these days, the story goes that we all are scared about technology when it's just introduced, but then we're really comfortable with it and don't even think about it twice. With that, thank you very much. David, the floor is yours.